This past weekend in San Juan, Puerto Rico, the 2026 Pokemon Go San Juan Special Championship was held. This was to be the first official tournament since the Memories in Motion move update, and many battlers were curious as to what Pokemon would end up rising to the top. And when the dust settled at the end of the weekend, a newer trainer hailing from Puerto Rico itself, Joe Eddy, was able to emerge victorious and claim the title. Now, this regional was not streamed, but a big thank you to Joe Eddy for providing his footage of his run so we can see what the San Juan meta looked like. The team that Joe Eddy used for the tournament is as follows: Corviknight and Empoleon as the two steel types, Wigglytuff and Licky as two normals, and then to round out the team, two shadow Pokemon in Shadow Altaria and Shadow Quagsire. Shadow Quagsire was a beneficiary of the Mudshot rework, as Mudshot now has faster pacing, allowing Quagsire to spam out Aqua Tails every 8 turns, and Shadow Altaria does offer a few advantages, including a significantly improved matchup against Unova Stunfisk. So, now that we know the team, let's hop into the battles and take a look at Joe Eddy's climb to the top. Joe Eddy's round 1 opponent of the tournament was just me, Josh Lee. Josh Lee's team consists of Corviknight, Empoleon, Florges, Galarian Corsola, Charjabug, and Guzzlord. The Florges has opted for the more conventional Chilling Water Trailblaze moveset instead of the Disarming Voice moveset popularized by Rise to Occasion in his Merida win, and the Guzzlord is running the standard Sludge Bomb. This will be a best of 3 series. The battlers lock in for game number 1, Shadow Altaria for Joe Eddy, into the Florges for just me, Josh Lee. Despite the type disadvantage, Shadow Altaria can actually do quite well here, because the Florges simply has no charge attacks that can even hit for neutral damage. Florges debuffs with the Chilling Water, there's a safe switch into Empoleon, Florges banks energy, retreats into Corviknight, but Corviknight is so far behind on energy. The Empoleon-Corviknight matchup is already very fine for Empoleon to begin with, because of Empoleon's superior pacing. Now that you add Empoleon having a big energy head start, and Empoleon could just completely run away with this entire game. Hydro Cannon number 2 will get the shield. Corviknight fires off energy. Is this the air cutter bait? Is this the nuke? Joe Eddy no shields. It's the payback. Empoleon gets rocked. Empoleon hangs on, barely surviving the final sand attack to make one final Hydro Cannon. Hydro Cannon knocks out the Corviknight, winning switch advantage and shield advantage, and Florges gets the Fairy Wind down. Back in comes Shadow Altaria to be immediately debuffed by the Chilling Water, but even a -1 Sky attack will still inflict some pretty solid damage. And that's exactly what Joe Eddy is going to go for. This should pretty comfortably put the Florges into Body Slam range. Florges is going to no shield, in comes Licky. Opponent reveals their final Pokemon in the back is going to be the Empoleon. This Empoleon is down to energy, it's down to shield, and it is in a lot of trouble. Licky lands the Shadow Ball just like that. Empoleon loses about 60% of its health bar. Empoleon can hit back hard with the back-to-back Hydro Cannons, but the biggest issue that Empoleon is going to have is the shield advantage that Licky still maintains. Licky able to tank the first, shield the second, but Licky already has the energy for a Shadow Ball loaded. Gonna go for the max overfarm 3 and the move, firing off the Shadow Ball right before that Hydro Cannon will be available. Shadow Ball shielded up by the Empoleon. Empoleon gonna be firing off another Hydro, and now all shields are down for the remainder of the game. The Florges is still alive in the back, but it is pretty low. Licky farms up, going for the Shadow Ball, and the opponent gets a catch onto Florges. Florges will get knocked out. The Empoleon is very low. In comes Empoleon, and the Licky makes it to the Body Slam. It's resisted, but enough damage has been done. Body Slam knocks out the Empoleon, and that's a game 1 win for Joe Eddy. The battlers lock in for game number 2, and it's the battle of steel types, Empoleon into Corviknight. Despite the fact that it seems like Corviknight should dominate this matchup, Empoleon actually plays this matchup very close, and if Corviknight gets a bait versus nuke call wrong, then things can get out of hand very, very quickly. Empoleon lands the Hydro Cannon, that does pretty nice damage. Oh my goodness, what a catch! Able to save the Empoleon and catch onto the Shadow Altaria. And it catches an air cutter bait at that. Josh Lee gonna be sending out a Guzzlord. Guzzlord will be able to inflict some pretty solid damage with Brutal Swing, but what Brutal Swing's not going to do is take the knockout. Altaria will be able to hang on, these Dragon Breaths adding up quite significantly, and Altaria is going to look to lock in some critical damage with Sky Attack. Sky Attack shielded up by Josh Lee. Josh Lee farms down with the Guzzlord, exiting with quite a lot of residual energy. While one Brutal Swing will not come close to knocking out the Empoleon, if Empoleon no shields, it could end up being put into Sand Attack plus Air Cutter range from the Corviknight. Joe Eddie does not want to let that happen, so he shields up the Brutal Swing and then goes to the Drill Peck. This will be close. This is just about exact HP for a Drill Peck knocking out. Drill Peck lands, down goes the Guzzlord, and back in comes Corviknight. Corviknight approaches Payback Energy, but Joe Eddie with catch after catch. He saves the Empoleon as Payback connects onto the Licky Licky. In the back is Empoleon, and this is going to be a bit of a tricky game to win. If Joe Eddie wants to win this game, it's going to be on the back of very precise Empoleon energy management. Licky Licky has already taken so much damage that I don't believe it's going to be able to hang on here to the Hydro Cannon. Licky Licky kind of has to let this go. Hydro Cannon lands, it gets KO'd, and now it's all up to Empoleon. Hydro Cannon will hit for resisted damage, but the Hydro Cannon will add up. Joe Eddie going to use his final shield as he looks to farm up to the back-to-back Hydros, and now he has a tough choice to make. Does he think that he wins charge stack priority? If he doesn't want to risk it, he's going to have to overfarm. And he does just that, not wanting to risk it because losing charge stack priority there would be catastrophic. Now Joe Eddie has to try and farm up to the back-to-back. It's going to be close, but he gets there. Very low HP. The question is, can he survive one sand attack from that Corviknight? In comes the Corviknight, and he gets the Hydro Cannon. Sand attack does not take the knockout. Hydro Cannon KOs the Corviknight, and Joe Eddie's on to round 2. Joe Eddie's round 2 opponent is Rosario0999, running a team consisting of Licky Licky, Empoleon, Altaria, Gourgeist, Wigglytuff, and the newly buffed Low Kick Annihilate. The battlers lock in perfect mirror leads for game number 1, Shadow Altaria into Altaria. Joe Eddie has brought the Shadow Quagsire for the very first time in this game. He tries for a Sky Attack catch onto Empoleon, but Rosario shows great patience, holding on to the energy, and instead going for the harder hitting Flamethrower. In comes Annihilate. Annihilate immediately under threat from big super effective damage from Drill Peck. Annihilate puts up the shield trying for the low kick down, but they can't get there, and they did not go for the CMP tie. They could have won charge stack priority there over the Empoleon, but instead they just go for the farm down, taking massive damage in the process. They do make the back-to-back Rage Fist, so they will be able to pressure a shield from Joe Eddie, because Joe Eddie does not want to lose all this energy that he stored on the Shadow Altaria. Altaria will shield once farm down, but no, there's a pivot out from Rosario, sending back in the Altaria. But the Altaria is going to take huge damage from the Sky Attack. That sets up a farm down for Joe Eddie, and Joe Eddie is very close to a Sky Attack into the final Pokemon, which is revealed to be Empoleon. Bad news for the Empoleon, as in comes the Shadow Quagsire, and Quagsire is just simply not worried about a Hydro Cannon landing. A second Hydro Cannon would be a problem, but the first, really not going to be an issue when Metal Sound is resisted. Empoleon has no fast move pressure in this matchup, so Shadow Quagsire with that incredibly fast straight 4 pacing, just going to keep farming, avoiding the opponent getting the catch. Very nice patience by Joe Eddie, not letting the catch happen, as that was Rosario's only hope in the game. Now without that catch, Quagsire gets the Stone Edge Empoleon, taking the knockout, and the game 1 win. The battlers lock back in for game number 2, leading Shadow Altaria once again, but this time into Licky Licky. Not a great spot to be in as Joe Eddie. Joe Eddie gonna make a catch onto Quagsire. That's a very nice catch. Timed it to get the Mudshot Sneak as well, as Licky Licky did go for the Body Slam bait. Bad news for the Quagsire, however, as it's immediately answered with a Gourgeist. Gourgeist gonna look to overfarm here, could have fired off the Seed Bomb immediately, but Gourgeist more than happy to take the Stone Edge if it means they can exit with extra residual energy. But look at the speed on Quagsire already at the Aqua Tail. This will come pretty close to knocking out, and it actually gets a shield from the Gourgeist. Gourgeist would have survived, but it would have been very, very low. So Quagsire safe switch gets answered by a Gourgeist, and if they overfarm too much, Quagsire can actually force a Protect Shield there. That is a pretty impressive showing from the newly buffed Quagsire. Gourgeist fires off the Shadow Ball. Shadow Altaria needs to farm down, but cannot get it. The Gourgeist, too bulky, makes a second Shadow Ball, and that's going to force the final Protect Shield away from the Altaria. Rosario pivots back into the Licky Licky. Licky Licky is so incredibly bulky, so even with this huge energy head start on the Altaria, that's honestly pretty fine for this Licky Licky. Another Sky Attack loaded for this Shadow Altaria. This is going to force a shield. There's the pivot into Empoleon. Empoleon going to try and make the Hydro Cannon, but can't get there before Rosario will fire off the Shadow Ball. That's a lot of health lost for the Empoleon. Empoleon farms up. CMP ties on the Drill Peck. Drill Peck does cover for a potential catch. I believe Rosario was still switch locked for a few seconds more, but it would have been very, very close. In the back, that's not what Joe Eddie was hoping to see. In the back, the final Pokemon is revealed as Rosario's own Empoleon. I think this Empoleon is just simply too healthy. Joe Eddie gonna farm up to the Hydro, go for the catch onto the Altaria, but unfortunately, I think even this is not gonna be enough. And Rosario covered for the catch by going for the Drill Peck. Rosario pivots into the Gourgeist. Gourgeist did not have any energy, but the Empoleon already has the Hydro Cannon loaded, and unfortunately is outside of Hydro Cannon range for Joetti. So Drill Peck will take the knockout. Joetti knows he needs the double up, and he just cannot get there. Rosario gets the Hydro Cannon. That's going to be knocking out Joetti's Empoleon, and Rosario gets the equalizer, moving us to a decisive game number 3. Rosario runs back the same lead in game number 3 of Licky Licky, but Joetti's leading a different flyer. This time, he's leading Corviknight. He has still brought that Empoleon Altaria core that has been incredibly strong so far, but this time, it's lurking in the back. Corviknight really likes the Licky Licky matchup if it's able to successfully land a payback. Licky Licky lands a Shadow Ball, but 2 Shadow Balls will not take the knockout, whereas 2 paybacks absolutely will. So for Corviknight, it's pretty comfortable to always play the Zero Shield, especially after you've already landed that payback. So for Corviknight, this is a pretty easy no shield. Licky Licky baited with a Body Slam, and this is where things could get bad for Rosario. Having that Body Slam no shielded makes things very, very tough. The payback does get shielded. Licky Licky gonna fire off energy. They're still gonna need to go for the Shadow Ball, because if they go for the Body Slam, which they do, that's not gonna knock out, and Corviknight's gonna make another move. Corviknight makes the Air Cutter. It's all going wrong. Air Cutter takes the knockout. Joetti wins switch advantage and shield advantage. Rosario gets a 1 Metal Sound head start on Empoleon. Joetti has to decide what to bring in and decides to mirror Empoleon's. This way, he can guarantee that he does have that Shadow Altaria with full HP in the back. And considering that the Licky Licky is already out of the way, taking a look at Rosario's team, that's a pretty good bet as long as it's not the Wigglytuff. Rosario has yet to bring that Pokemon. The Empoleons are going to be trading Hydro Cannons back and forth. The Metal Sounds being double resisted means there's really not a lot of fast attack pressure in this matchup. Hydro Cannon from Joetti is going to be getting the Empoleon low, and there's the catch onto the Shadow Altaria. This catch gives Joetti win cons even if it's the Wigglytuff in the back for Rosario, and Rosario actually covered for the catch through the Drill Peck, anticipating that play. Joetti now puts up the shield in the back. It's Gourgeist, and this game is going to be a win, as Shadow Altaria will very comfortably be able to make the back-to-back Sky attacks before the back-to-back Shadow Balls are available. So this game is over. Altaria's Sky attack gets the shield. Altaria playing to the charge stack priority tie, and with a shield to hide behind, this game is over. Normally, Gourgeist can survive an Altaria Sky attack, but this is the Shadow Altaria. There's no way out. Sky attack takes the knockout, clutching the win for Joetti, and he's on to round 3. Joetti's opponent in round number 3 is the Matt For Real, who's running a team with some very familiar Pokemon. Corviknight, Empoleon, Altaria are all Pokemon Joe has on his team, but Matt also has Florges, Stunfisk, and Furret. The battlers lock in for game number 1, and it's a pretty neutral lead matchup, Shadow Altaria into Empoleon. Joetti has once again brought the Empoleon in the back, but this time with Licky Licky as a third. Licky Licky just offers incredible neutral play into Matt's team, even if it is aligned into its technically bad matchups of Empoleon or the Unova Stunfisk. And what a catch from Joetti. He's able to catch the Drill Peck onto the Empoleon where it's going to be resisted and preserve the Altaria at very, very high HP. Matt For Real going to be sending out Furret, and this works pretty nicely for the Empoleon. Empoleon is up energy because he got the Metal Sound Sneak, and that is big damage onto the Furret. Furret can fire off the Trailblaze. Trailblaze is just about going to take the knockout here onto the Empoleon. Empoleon hangs on 1 HP, but with not enough health to make the Hydro Cannon. Back in comes Shadow Altaria for a 1 shield farm down, but this Altaria is getting melted by these Sucker Punches. If Altaria gets the farm down, it's going to be firmly in Drill Peck range, so Altaria is going to actually decide against the farm down and fire off the Sky attack. This does mean Altaria loses a lot of energy, but being outside of Drill Peck range is big. And Matt's final Pokemon is revealed as Unova Stunfisk. Unova Stunfisk is normally a pretty good answer to an Empoleon safe switch, but with Joetti getting that sneak earlier, that complicated things because then the Stunfisk would no longer have the pacing advantage. Discharge fails to take the knockout on Altaria. Altaria hits back hard with the Flamethrower, and now it's up to Licky Licky to try and 1v2. But I just don't think Licky Licky has enough in the tank. The decision to throw the Sky attack on Altaria, I think, is what ends up coming back to bite Joetti, as without that energy, he wanted to try and preserve the HP on the Altaria, but with that energy lost, the Stunfisk and the Empoleon are just going to be able to inflict too much damage on this Licky Licky. Licky Licky full send in the Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball takes the knockout onto the Stunfisk, but back in comes the Empoleon. It already has a Hydro Cannon loaded, and unfortunately, the writing is on the wall in this one. Licky Licky doesn't have the energy, it doesn't have the shields either, trying for a catch onto the Altaria, but it's not to be. Back in comes Licky Licky, not even going to throw the energy because this game is over. Empoleon knocks out Licky Licky, and that's going to be a Game 1 win for the Mad for Real. The battlers lock in for game number 2, Altaria into Stunfisk. Now this is a very good matchup for the Shadow Altaria. One of the reasons to run Shadow Altaria is this specific matchup, as you do 1 extra damage per Dragon Breath to the Stunfisk. Now 1 extra damage doesn't sound like a lot until you remember that Dragon Breath is a 1-turn fast move. Every half second you get 1 extra damage, and that adds up immensely over the course of a battle. Shadow Altaria connects with a Flamethrower, and that's going to be getting the Stunfisk very low. Now the Stunfisk is even in a range where Altaria can knock out with the Sky Attack. It doesn't even need a second Flamethrower. This charge will be putting Altaria into the red HP. Gonna go for a Flamethrower anyway, potentially covering for a catch onto Empoleon, but no catch comes through. Instead, Stunfisk will get KO'd. Empoleon gonna be answered with an immediate pivot into the Corviknight. This matchup, we've seen it get quite uncomfortable for the Corviknight if a bait or nuke call goes wrong. Whereas Empoleon just has incredible consistency, just spamming out these Hydro Cannons left and right. Bait going for the Air Cutter. This could be a big turning point in this match. The Air Cutter gets the shield, no boost, but being able to save that energy is very big for the Corviknight. Corviknight will come pretty close to knocked out here by the Hydro Cannon, so the shield will come up. There's a pivot out from Matt. He's going to be saving Empoleon and revealing his final Pokemon as Furret. Corviknight full sends the payback. That connects, and that is very big damage onto the Furret. Corviknight going to make an Air Cutter as well. While this will not knock out the Furret, it's going to be getting Furret very, very low. Unfortunately, it looks like Furret is going to be able to Sucker Punch down, and that forces a pivot out into Empoleon. Furret fires off the Trailblaze, no shield from Empoleon. Empoleon going to try and go for the Metal Sound down, but Furret hangs on 1 HP. Boosted Swift has to be respected, and that is very unfortunate for Joe Eddie. Back in comes the Empoleon for the Mat for real. Joe Eddie at the back-to-back Hydro Cannons. These Hydro Cannons will definitely add up. Hydro Cannon number 1 is going to be shielded. That's a charge attack priority tie. Can Joe Eddie hang on here? It's going to be close. Hydro lands. Empoleon survives on 1 HP to make the second Hydro Cannon, and that is what Joe Eddie needed. This Hydro Cannon will be putting them pretty low. In comes the Corviknight. Corviknight makes the Air Cutter as the Metal Sounds fail to take that farm down. And that's going to be sealing game number 2 as Air Cutter knocks out the Empoleon. And we move to a decisive game number 3. The battlers get locked in, and its perfect mirror leads Empoleon into Empoleon. For this critical game number 3, Joe Eddie's made a bold choice. The Shadow Altaria has been benched in favor of the Shadow Quagsire. It's Shadow Quagsire and the Corviknight lurking in the back. The Empoleons will be able to trade Hydro Cannons, neither one really inflicting a lot of damage onto each other. Hydro lands, Matt's going to pivot out into the Furret, but bad news for Furret as in comes Corviknight. Corviknight is just such a hard answer to the Furret. Furret's going to be going for the Trailblaze. It's double resisted, but Furret is just trying to boost up its Sucker Punches to inflict as much damage as humanly possible. Now this Swift is boosted, and it will actually do a pretty sizable dent onto the Corviknight. This Furret is not quite in payback range, so Joe Eddie will go for the Air Cutter. Air Cutter may not have gotten the boost, but it does do enough damage that payback will absolutely now knock out the Furret. So payback lands, down goes Furret, in comes Stunfisk, but Joe Eddie is not going to concede that farm down. Instead, he gets aggressive and pivots back into Empoleon. Hydro Cannon combo play gets shielded, but this Empoleon has just so much residual energy. There's a second Hydro, this time a no shield, and that's critical health lost for Matt. Matt commits to the farm down and gets it, exiting with a ton of energy as in comes the Quagsire. But Matt's big problem now is he has no fast move pressure into the Quagsire, and Joe Eddie knows it. Joe Eddie is going to be no shielding both of these Mud Bombs, saying, you know what, you simply cannot farm me down even if you tried. Empoleon fires off the Hydro Cannon, now the shield starts to come up, but between Metal Sounds and Thunder Shocks, every fast move that Matt has for the rest of this game is going to be resisted into the Quagsire. Mudshot is going to get the full farm down of the Empoleon. Back in comes the Stunfisk. Stunfisk is going to be now hit with the back-to-back Aqua Tails, and the pacing on Quagsire is relentless. Matt no shields, he knows it's over, and Joe Eddie is on to the winners finals. His opponent there is just Dirk, whose team consists of Corviknight, Licky Licky, Shadow Primate with Ice Punch over close combat, Jellicent, Stunfisk, and Florges. The battlers lock in for game number 1 of this best of 5 series, and it's Shadow versus Shadow, Shadow Altaria versus Shadow Primate. Ice Punch will be a problem here. Joe Eddie tries for the catch onto Wigglytuff. He's unsuccessful, and Wigglytuff will be answered with the Licky Licky. Joe Eddie has correctly identified that Wigglytuff is extremely safe into Dirk's team. Dirk does not have the traditional Empoleon, and that means Wigglytuff is basically unanswerable. Even Licky Licky, which is a neutral matchup, just gets completely overrun by the Wigglytuff. Wigglytuff gets to apply the Icy Wind debuff. Now suddenly body slams are not going to do much of anything, and Wigglytuff should be able to charm it into a range where Swift will be able to secure the knockout. The worry for Joe Eddie throughout the entirety of this game is still going to be that Primeape energy. That Primeape has quite a lot of energy. In comes Florges. Joe Eddie pivots out of the matchup, saving the Wigglytuff presumably for that Primeape later on, and sending back in the Shadow Altaria. Altaria's Sky Attack lands, big damage onto the Florges. Florges is on Chilling Water in Trailblaze, which means it is completely walled here. Dirk is not pivoting back at the Primeape, he's holding it in the back, trusting in the fact that the Primeape energy is going to serve him well. Dirk gonna fire off another charge attack. Chilling Water will not knock out, so Dirk decides to go for the Trailblaze. Trailblaze should allow him to go for a one shield farm down, and with him exiting with energy that's boosted on the Florges and energy on the Primeape, this is gonna be a very close game. But no, Dirk misremembers Altaria energy. He fires off the Trailblaze, and just like that, he exits double boosted, but he's not gonna have the energy. In comes Primeape, answered with the Wigglytuff, and Wigglytuff still has 2 Protect Shields to hide behind. Primeape baits with a Rage Fist. This will be a boosted Ice Punch now, but Joe Eddie has 2 shields to hide behind. He's going to be double shielding the Wigglytuff, getting the charm down, and exiting very close to a move. Back in comes the Florges. Florges just going to get charmed down. Who even needs the Swift? And that's a game 1 win for Joe Eddie. Battlers lock in for game number 2, and it's a very bad lead for Joe Eddie, leading Shadow Quagsire into Florges. 1 Mud Shot and a safe switch into the Shadow Altaria. Dirk's going to be staying in and firing off this Chilling Water. Chilling Water not going to do much, but it will debuff the Shadow Altaria. That means the Shadow Altaria will now not be nearly as effective as Dirk sends in Jellicent. Normally this matchup is a pretty convincing one for the Shadow Altaria, but now it's debuffed, and Dirk stayed in long enough to put the Shadow Altaria into Shadow Ball range. So that was a pretty nice subtlety by Dirk, and that should set him up very well in this matchup. As the back-to-back Sky Attacks, they do a lot of damage, but importantly, they do not take the knockout. Joe Eddie's going to be no shielding, Shadow Ball is going to be taking the knockout, and he sends in the Wigglytuff to get the charm down. But Wigglytuff can't charm down before the Surf is available, and this is a lot of HP lost, as Wigglytuff loses about 40% of its HP instantly in exchange for not a lot of energy. In the back is Corviknight. He banks an Icy Wind. He's going to be sending in the Quagsire. That's going to be answered with the Florges, and Florges already has quite a lot of energy. Florges full sends the Trailblaze. Quagsire puts up the shield, and with Quagsire not getting debuffed by Chilling Water there, is there ever a world in which Quagsire energy and that loaded Icy Wind can secure a win for Joe Eddie? It's looking tough, but he's not out of it yet. First Aqua Tail is going to connect, second Aqua Tail is going to get the shield, Switch Timer going to be up very soon, but if he wants to try and combo play, he's going to need to get the final Protect Shield first. Florges goes for yet another Trailblaze, now boosting itself up to +2 attack. Even the Fairy Winds are adding up on the Quagsire. Quagsire gets the shield with the Aqua Tail. There's the snipe, but Joe Eddie gets it caught onto the Corviknight. That's not what he was hoping to see. Dirk reads the snipe, catches the Icy Wind onto the Corviknight, and by preserving that Florges, just Dirk should have found the equalizer here in game number 2. Dirk does not get the boost from the Air Cutter, but the damage is already done as Wigglytuff has just lost way too much of its HP. Another Air Cutter lands, Wigglytuff barely hangs on. There's the boost from Dirk. He didn't need it, but he gets it at the last possible second. A last second Icy Wind from the Wigglytuff will put the Corviknight low. There's the switch, Florges into the Quagsire, and Quagsire will get outpaced. Good read by Dirk. He saves the Florges. It takes back-to-back KOs, and Dirk gets the equalizer. It's 1 apiece. The Battlers lock in for game number 3. It's a dominant lead win for Joe Eddie, leading Shadow Altaria into Corviknight. Altaria will have a pacing advantage here, farming up to the Flamethrower. There's a catch attempt from Dirk, unsuccessful, as he save switches Jellicent, and that's going to be met with the Wigglytuff. Wigglytuff, despite the fact that it does have the type advantage, doesn't have the cleanest matchup here ever. It's at a pretty significant pacing disadvantage, and its charge attacks are completely walled. So even though it gets to land the Icy Wind, Jellicent can typically make 3 Surfs and win the 0 Protect Shield scenario. Jellicent already had Surf number 2 and should make it to Surf number 3 as well. Jellicent actually switches out, saving the energy and sending in the Corviknight. But by switch locking the Corviknight, this sets up the Shadow Altaria. Shadow Altaria did not have its energy caught out of the Jellicent earlier, and it is absolutely loaded. Flamethrower shielded up by the Corviknight. Dirk potentially trying to protect this Corviknight, maybe get to his timer and get the Jellicent back on the field. Corviknight does land the payback, but this matchup is just miserable. You can never farm down. There's another Flamethrower already ready. Flamethrower lands. Corviknight barely hangs on, and the final Pokemon is revealed to be Florges. Florges is in an advantageous matchup against Corviknight, but it's down a shield. Florges gets to apply that Chilling Water debuff first, Corviknight returning fire with the Air Cutter. Air Cutter is not going to do much, and it will not get the boost. Corviknight could have had an opportunity there, a 30% chance to get its attack step back, but it was unable to do so. And a second Chilling Water means this Corviknight is now double debuffed. So the Corviknight still has 2 Protect Shields, but it can't really do much damage. He's going to pivot out, sending in the Altaria. There's the combination play by Dirk as he switches back into the Jellicent and fires off the Surf. But importantly for Joetti, he now gets a huge farm down. This Altaria has a massive amount of energy, and when Florges re-hits the field, he's pretty close to the back-to-back Sky attacks. Back in comes the Florges. Looks like that may have been a charge attack priority tie there. Chilling Water to the Sky attack. So now this Sky attack is debuffed, but even a debuffed Sky attack will still do way too much damage. Shield comes up, back in comes the Corviknight, and Corviknight should have the energy head start that it needs to make the double Air Cutter and win the game, because a Chilling Water will not take the knockout. Air Cutter finally gets its boost in the 11th hour. Chilling Water lands, Corviknight hangs on, Corviknight sand attacks down the Florges, and makes an Air Cutter into the opposing Corviknight. So that endgame with the Florges got a little bit tricky, but able to stay strong, get the win, and he's 1 win away from the grand finals. And in game number 4, he gets the lead call right, Wigglytuff into the Shadow Primeape. Dirk safe switches into Florges, that's answered with Empoleon, and it's all going wrong for Dirk. Florges will be able to boost up its attack with Trailblaze, but it is taking catastrophic damage from the Metal Sounds. Empoleon overfarming perfectly, playing to the charge attack priority tie, needing the Hydro Cannon to secure the knockout. Hydro Cannon is shielded. Dirk trying to make the play for alignment, but for Joetti, he's very comfortable shielding back, because he can always just overfarm and play to the CMP tie. In this instance, he's actually going to farm up and throw 1 beforehand, maybe to try and avoid a catch, but he has enough HP where he's guaranteed to make a move into the Primeape. In comes the Primeape, and Primeape's about to get absolutely shredded by this Drill Peck, and if he shields, then he has to deal with the Wigglytuff, so there just really isn't a good spot for Dirk to be in right now. In comes the Wigglytuff. There's no close combat available, which means this can only be a Shadow Ice Punch, and Shadow Ice Punch is easily survivable. In the back, it's Unova Stunfisk, and unfortunately, there is just absolutely nothing Stunfisk can do here. Even if it was even shields, Stunfisk would lose it, but the Shadow Altaria is up a shield. These 3 damaged Dragon Breaths are shredding through the Stunfisk, and Altaria already has the energy needed for the Flamethrower. And once the Flamethrower is landed, honestly, the final shield can probably just be saved for the Wigglytuff, because this will get the Stunfisk low enough that Wigglytuff should just be able to charm through everything else. Flamethrower lands, Stunfisk already deep into the red HP, they're forced to fire off a discharge, and Joetti sees the win con. He's letting Altaria go. From here on out, it's the Wigglytuff show. Wigglytuff hits the field, he fires off the Swift as soon as he gets it. This will guarantee the knockout out of the Stunfisk, and the Shadow Primeape is just getting farmed down. Back in comes the Primeape, Charms absolutely deleting it, and Joetti takes the series 3-1, and he's on to the grand finals. Joe's opponent in grand finals is the Matt For Real, the player who he faced and defeated in winners round 3. Matt lead Empoleon into Stunfisk, he safe switches into Shadow Altaria, and it appears that Matt does not have a clean answer to the Shadow Altaria. He's going to stay in with the Stunfisk, fire off the discharge, but Altaria really doesn't mind taking discharge damage whatsoever. Matt's going to be sending in Empoleon, and this is actually a very awkward health range for the Empoleon to deal with. The Shadow Altaria is outside of Drill Peck range, and that means that Joe should be able to no-shield, make a second Flamethrower, and guarantee either switch or shield advantage. And honestly, considering the lead with Stunfisk, either would be pretty catastrophic. Now Matt has a pretty difficult decision ahead of him. He decides to shield the Empoleon, surrendering a shield advantage in exchange for keeping switch advantage. But this could open the door for Joetti, because a shield advantage Shadow Quagsire is exceedingly strong into Matt's entire team, even if it's one of its typical bad matchups like against the Trailblaze Florges. Empoleon's going to overfarm slightly, wanting to take the knockout. Even the undercharged Hydro Cannon will still secure the KO, and back in comes the Stunfisk. Stunfisk will outpace. Joetti gets the catch. The hope is that this is the discharge and not the harder hitting Mud Bomb. It is going to be the Mud Bomb, so it does hit for neutral damage. And in the back is Corviknight. Corviknight can probably just spam out Air Cutters here, just trying to make life as uncomfortable as possible for the Quagsire. Quagsire going to be putting up the shield because you kind of have to shield something, and the Quagsire is so far ahead on energy. Quag gonna try and sneak a Stone Edge past the shield here. Corviknight is gonna no-shield, and that is some pretty critical damage. This is a second Air Cutter. Joetti gonna be no-shielding now. This Air Cutter will fail to take the knockout, but Corviknight does get the boost. He's going to farm up to the Stone Edge, bait with the Aqua Tail, hoping this time to try and get the shield as Corviknight has already boosted. But Corviknight no shields, in comes Empoleon, answered with the Stunfisk. Can Hydro secure the knockout from here? The Stunfisk has taken quite a lot of Dragon Breath damage already from the Altaria earlier in the game. Hydro Cannon lands. It does not take the knockout, but Joe Eddie gets the CMP tie over the Stunfisk. That is catastrophic for Matt. He gets the CMP tie, but now Empoleon just no shields, and this is going to set up the Shadow Quagsire. He undercharges, trying to get as much farm as possible, but Quagsire KOs with the Mud Shot, exits with the Aqua Tail loaded, and that is going to be a Game 1 win for Joe Eddie in the Grand Finals, as Aqua Tail KOs the Corviknight, and despite a terrible lead, he's up 1-0 in this best of 5. The battlers lock in for game number 2, and it's a dominant lead win for Joe Eddie. Empoleon into Florges. Florges throws a Fairy Wind. There's the safe switch into Corviknight, and that's going to be swiftly answered with the Shadow Altaria. This matchup is a very nice one for the Shadow Altaria. Altaria just never takes any fast move pressure, and even if the payback lands, an Air Cutter will not take the knockout. Corviknight has to farm all the way up to a second payback if they want to threaten a shield. Corviknight gets absolutely rocked by Flamethrower. They're able to barely hang on, and with a fraction of HP remaining, make the last second payback. But Joe Eddie is more than happy to put up the shield, because he knows this energy will be very threatening into that Florges once it gets brought back in. The Florges does have a Fairy Wind of residual energy, but there's already the Sky Attack loaded on the Altaria, and just like that, Florges loses half of its health bar. Florges can take the knockout here with the Chilling Water, but it appears they're just trying for a full farm down. This farm down could make things a little bit tricky because Trailblaze does definitely add up onto the Empoleon, and that's exactly what Matt's going for. He wants as much energy as humanly possible. In comes Empoleon, Matt switches into the Stunfisk, but Stunfisk is going to get shredded by the Hydro Cannon, and now in comes the Quagsire, and there's just no path forward for Matt in this game. The Quagsire is just simply in a commanding position. Stunfisk goes for the Mud Bomb. Quagsire gets the farm up to the back-to-back Aqua Tails, and this will guarantee the knockout onto the Stunfisk. Stunfisk still has the Protect Shield, but it cannot afford to use it. Quagsire loses charge attack priority, but Quagsire is just going to let itself get KO'd, and instead trust in the Empoleon. Even though Florges has boosted up its attack, one Trailblaze will still not knock out the Empoleon, and Joe Eddie knows it, so Joe Eddie is going to be no-shielding, trusting Empoleon can survive the Trailblaze. He gets the Metal Sound down, and he's one win away from claiming the championship. The battlers lock in for game number 3, and it's a slightly negative lead for Joe Eddie, leading Shadow Altaria into Furret. I am going to have a talk with my graphics department, which is just me an hour ago, because it still says Joe Eddie's up 1-0 when he's up 2-0. Matt tries for a Sky Attack catch onto Empoleon. Joe Eddie holds the energy, and then he's going to be sending in Corviknight. But this matchup, especially with the Empoleon up energy, is not at all good for the Corviknight. Corviknight's going to go for the Hail Mary payback. If this payback gets shielded, this could be trouble. Payback is going to land. That's what Joe Eddie needed to see. But unfortunately, Empoleon's able to survive even with the payback landing. Hydro Cannon lands, and it looks like Empoleon is actually going to be the one to farm down. Metal sounding down, exiting very low, but only 2 away from the Hydro Cannon. Can Shadow Altaria get the farm down here? It's going to be close. Yes, it can. Altaria able to pick up the KO, and in the back is Florges. This is not the alignment that Joe Eddie was hoping for. Joe Eddie will get the Sky Attack. That's very nice damage into the Florges, and another Sky Attack as well. But there's a Furret with a ton of energy, and Furret can absolutely run away with this game. The Sky Attack is going to be no-shielded. There's a simultaneous switch, Empoleon into Furret, and this could be a very big problem. Joe Eddie no-shields the first, but now these are boosted Sucker Punches, and this Furret is about to absolutely go off. Joe Eddie puts up the shield, but he is in a lot of trouble. Another Trailblaze from the Furret. Furret now going to be at +2 attack. These +2 Sucker Punches are deleting this Empoleon. Empoleon's at the back-to-back Hydro Cannons. That's going to force a double shield out of the Furret, but Furret's going to farm down. It's going to exit with energy, and the Florges is pretty close to a move as well. Switch timer's up. In comes Altaria, but look at the Sucker Punches go. This Altaria getting torn to smithereens. Shield comes up, but the damage is already done. Altaria can't even make the Sky Attack. Furret with energy just took over this game as Matt secures a critical Game 3 win. He's not out of it just yet. The battlers lock in for game number 4. Shadow Altaria into Furret once again. Feels like deja vu of game number 3. Last time, Matt ended up banking energy and trying for a catch onto Empoleon, but this time he's actually going to stay in and fire off the Swift. This, I feel, is a lot better for Joe Eddie, because Joe Eddie would rather not have the Furret bank a Trailblaze for later and then be able to ramp up, because that Furret just completely destroyed his backline last game. Sky Attack lands, that's good damage. He's going to go for a catch onto Empoleon, but Matt shows great patience, holding onto the energy, and instead he'll now get to connect with the Trailblaze. Trailblaze lands onto the Empoleon. He's going to stay in with the Furret, just trying to get as much damage as humanly possible, but he falls short of the Swift as the Metal Sound is able to take the knockout. This Empoleon is absolutely loaded. Matt sends in Florges. That is not the Pokemon that I was expecting to see here. Florges is about to get shredded by this Hydro Cannon. Hydro Cannon is going to land. There's a pivot out. In the back is Empoleon. Matt, I think, definitely should have brought in the Empoleon right away, but even if he did, with the energy advantage on Joe Eddie's Empoleon, I think no matter what he did, there just really wasn't a way out here. Corviknight going to be absorbing the Hydro Cannons. Corviknight could probably safely just go straight Air Cutter in this matchup because there's just no HP left for Matt, and Joe knows it. He's farming up to the payback, but he's only ever going to go for the Air Cutter. Just going to try and slowly chip away. Air Cutter gets the boost as well, and now these Sand Attacks start to ramp up. The double shield from the Corviknight just trying to make life as uncomfortable as possible for the Empoleon. Another Air Cutter, not even building up, just looking to get as much damage as humanly possible. Another shield comes out from the Empoleon. He's going to make a third Air Cutter. This is resisted, but it's +1, and that's going to put Empoleon into the red HP. Empoleon survives, not by much. Another Air Cutter boost, and look at those Sand Attacks. Empoleon was getting shredded. It had to fire off the Hydro Cannon. Now Joe brings back in the Empoleon, fires off the Hydro, and that's going to be KOing Matt's Empoleon. Down goes the Empoleon. He has the back-to-back loaded, and that is it. Joe Eddie has done it. Down goes Florges, and he takes the series and the San Juan Special Championship 3-1. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and an extra special thank you to Joe Eddie, because without him sending in this footage, we would not have gotten to see anything that happened at this tournament. The San Juan Special Championship and a lot of other of these smaller special championships are not streamed, so I'm very grateful to him for sending in this footage, so that way we get an early glimpse as to what the first tournament of the Memories in Motion meta looked like. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel, leave a like on it, subscribe to the channel if you have not, and I'll see you guys in the next video.